My dad raised his glass at my wedding and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're making a mistake marrying a poor man." The music cut mid-note. I could hear my own pulse louder than the applause that never came. Guests shifted in their seats, pretending to smile. My husband's hand trembled, but he didn't let go. I stood there, the daughter who'd just been disowned, in a white dress. Everyone thought that was the most humiliating day of my life. They were wrong. Because my father didn't stop there, he kept talking about money, about marriage. And minutes later, he would wish he'd never said a single word. I grew up in a house where silence was louder than love. Dad's shoes clicking across the hardwood floor meant the day was over. Mom's perfume, lavender, and something sharp floated in the air long after she passed by, pretending not to hear him raise his voice. On the surface, we were the perfect suburban family. Dad owned a small accounting firm. Mom volunteered at church. My little sister Emily had a laugh that could make the neighbors smile. And then there was me, Sophia, the daughter who colored outside the lines. Dad wanted me to marry up. He used to say it like a prayer he repeated before dinner. "Love is nice, but stability keeps you fed." I'd nod, pretending to agree while sketching designs for houses I'd never live in. I was an interior designer back then, freelancing for small clients who paid late but thanked me with coffee. To Dad, that meant failure wrapped in polite words. The first time I introduced him to Ethan, I knew he'd already decided. Ethan shook his hand, smiled, and said, "Nice to meet you, sir." Dad's eyes flicked to Ethan's shoes, worn leather, and his smile froze. Later that night, Mom called me. "He's just worried, honey," she said softly, as if her voice could pad the sharp edges of his judgment. Ethan wasn't rich. He worked as a junior software engineer, saving every cent for a future he believed in. But he was kind, and kind was a currency my family had long stopped trading in. He'd bring me takeout when I worked late leave notes on my laptop. "You're the most creative person I know." We built a life out of secondhand furniture and first-rate love. But every family dinner turned into a quiet battlefield. Dad would ask, "So when's he planning to get a real job?" Or, "You sure you want to raise kids in a rented apartment?" Ethan would squeeze my knee under the table, his silent way of saying, "Don't let him win." The night before the wedding, Dad offered me an envelope. Inside were 2 checks, one for me, one for Emily. "In case you change your mind," he said. I stared at him, at the man who measured love in dollars. "You can keep it," I said quietly. "I already made my choice." He sighed like he was watching a car crash he couldn't stop. And maybe that's why when he stood at my wedding glass, raised his pride, couldn't keep quiet. After the wedding, there was a silence that lasted months. No calls, no texts, just the echo of my father's voice replaying in my head. Ethan and I moved into a small apartment above a bakery. Every morning, the smell of fresh bread drifted through our windows, softening the sting of everything we'd lost. We learned to live simply, hand-me-down, couch-chipped plates, a plant that refused to die. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. When Emily finally visited, she stood in the doorway and whispered, "Dad said you'd come running back." I laughed, though it came out bitter. "Then don't tell him I'm running forward instead." She stayed for dinner, glancing at our modest kitchen, the flickering light bulb, the paint that needed another coat. "You guys seem happy," she said, surprised. Ethan grinned. "We are. Happiness doesn't need granite countertops." But I could tell she was carrying something she didn't know how to say. Weeks later, it came out in a late-night call. "Sophia," her voice cracked. "Dad told me not to tell you, but they're struggling. The firm's losing clients. He's thinking of selling the house." I went quiet. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a strange ache where anger used to live. Then came the wedding anniversary dinner. Mom called, said Dad wanted to make peace. I agreed, mostly for Emily's sake. We met at a fancy restaurant, the kind Dad used to brag about. He arrived in a suit that didn't fit like it used to. His hair had more gray, but his pride was intact. He talked about investments, responsibility, how Ethan should consider something more stable. The same sermon, just served on a more expensive plate. But halfway through dessert, Emily blurted out, "Dad, maybe they could help us with the loan." His fork froze midair. I looked at her. "What loan?" The silence stretched. Dad cleared his throat. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But Emily's eyes darted guilt written all over her face. That night after they left, Ethan and I sat in the car outside the restaurant. "They're in trouble," he said quietly, "and she wasn't supposed to tell you." I nodded. He's too proud to ask. He'd rather choke on his own pride than admit he needs help. Ethan reached for my hand. "What do we do?" I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur. "We wait," I said, "because something tells me the story isn't over." And I was right. The next time I saw my father, he wasn't talking about my mistakes. He was about to make one of his own. A few weeks later, the phone rang just after midnight. Emily's name flashed across the screen. Her voice was trembling. "Sophia, Dad asked me to co-sign a loan for the firm. He said it's just a formality, but..." My stomach tightened. "Emily, don't sign anything." She hesitated. "He said you wouldn't understand, that you always think he's the villain." "Then tell him villains don't ask their daughters to save their pride," I said quietly. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't just stand by. Ethan was already at the kitchen table, coffee steaming, laptop open. "We'll figure it out," he said, eyes scanning spreadsheets and legal blogs. "If he's using Emily's name for collateral, that's not just wrong, it's illegal." We spent nights researching buried in words I'd never thought I'd read: liability misrepresentation, elder financial exploitation. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about protecting the only person who still tried to believe in the good parts of our family. Mom called days later. "Your father's been under pressure," she whispered. "Don't make this harder." I almost laughed. Harder than standing by while he ruins Emily's credit? No, Mom. This time, I'm not pretending. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. The porch light still flickered just like it did when I was a kid. Inside, everything smelled the same lemon cleaner and Dad's aftershave. He was at the table, papers spread everywhere. "What are you doing here?" he asked without looking up. "Trying to stop you before you destroy Emily's future," I said. He scoffed. "Don't lecture me, Sophia. You chose your path. Let me handle mine." I slid a printout across the table. "You mean the one where you borrow money? In her name, I talked to a lawyer. It's fraud." For the first time, his eyes faltered. "You wouldn't tell." "Protect her, yes, I would." He stood, voice shaking with anger. "You've always been dramatic. You think love means interfering. You don't understand responsibility." "No, Dad," I said, meeting his gaze. "I understand it better than you do." When I left, the air outside felt colder, but my mind was clear. Ethan was waiting in the car headlights, cutting through the dark. "Well," he asked. "He's cornered," I said. "But he's not done yet." We met with our lawyer the next day, a kind woman named Grace, firm handshake, sharper eyes. Document everything she said. Emails, texts, any proof that Emily was coerced. Ethan nodded. "We'll be ready." The days crawled by. Dad stopped returning calls. Mom kept saying it's just stress. But I could feel it, something bigger was coming. On a rainy Friday, Ethan turned from his computer, face pale. "Sophia, look." He showed me the notice. Dad's firm was under investigation. Misused funds, false signatures. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet, heavy relief. "Grace was right," I said. "He's about to face what he's been running from." Ethan took my hand. "What now?" I exhaled slowly. "Now, we wait for him to land. Because when he did, I'd be standing there with the truth he could no longer outrun." The day everything came crashing down started with a call from my mother. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're coming for him, Sophia." I froze, the sound of my coffee dripping in the background. "Who's coming?" "The investigators. Someone tipped them off. They're at his office right now." For a long second, I didn't move. Then I said, "Good." Ethan looked up from his laptop. I must have sounded cold, but inside I was shaking. It wasn't satisfaction. It was years of fear finally collapsing into silence. We drove to the firm parking across the street. Rain tapped against the windshield in steady rhythm. Through the glass, I saw them, 2 officers in dark coats, one man in a gray suit with a clipboard. My father stood by the door, trying to look composed. He wasn't succeeding. "Do we go in?" Ethan asked. "Not yet," I said. "He needs to face it first." For years, he'd told me I didn't understand responsibility. But standing there soaked in the rain, I realized he was the one who never did. Hours later, Mom called again. He's being questioned. They say someone used false signatures for loan applications. He swears it wasn't him. It was, I said quietly, and he knows it. That night, when the news broke publicly, the headline flashed across every local feed: Miller Accounting under investigation for fraudulent loan filings. Emily called me crying. What's going to happen to him? I wanted to tell her he'd be okay, but lies were part of what broke us. He'll have to face it, I said instead, but he's not alone. I'll be there. The following Monday, Grace, our lawyer, called. They're allowing voluntary cooperation. If he admits what happened, they'll consider leniency. He needs representation immediately. I said, he'll never ask. Then you'll have to show up before pride buries him. So we did. Ethan and I drove to the courthouse the next morning. The sky was bright, painfully clear, as if mocking how heavy everything felt. Inside, Dad was seated at a long table with stacks of files beside him. His eyes met mine for the first time in months. I expected anger. I saw fear. "Sophia," he said slowly, "why are you here? To make sure you don't drag Emily down with you." He swallowed, jaw tightening. "They said someone forged documents. They think it was me." "It was you," I said, "and if you don't tell the truth, they'll charge her too. Her name's on the forms." His eyes darted to the floor. "I just wanted to keep the business alive, for the family." "By using your daughter's credit, by lying," my voice cracked. "That's not for the family, that's for your ego." Ethan stepped forward, calm but firm. "Mr. Miller, this is the part where you stop talking and start listening. The investigators already have the evidence. The only question is whether you'll take responsibility or let Emily take the fall." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then my father sagged back in his chair as if the air had been knocked out of him. "I never wanted to hurt her," he whispered. "Then prove it," I said. "Tell them the truth." Grace leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, I can negotiate terms if you cooperate. It's your best chance." He nodded slowly. "Fine. I'll tell them everything." The hearing was quiet, clinical, like watching a stranger dismantle my childhood piece by piece. Dad admitted the false signatures, the loans, the misused funds. I sat beside Emily, her hand trembling in mine. Mom was in the back, crying silently. When the judge finally spoke, his words felt both heavy and merciful. "Mr. Miller, you violated trust, not only of your clients, but of your own family. However, your cooperation is noted. You will pay restitution and serve probation." It was over. But it didn't feel over. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, cameras clicked. My father shielded his face, but when one of them shouted, "Mr. Miller, how does it feel to lose everything?" he stopped walking. He turned to me. His eyes were glassy, his voice low. "You must be happy now." I shook my head. "No, Dad. I'm just relieved you finally told the truth." He looked at me for a long time as if searching for the daughter he used to control. And then to my surprise, he whispered, "I'm sorry. Not loud enough for the cameras, just for me." Weeks passed. The noise faded. Emily's name was cleared and she went back to school. Mom called more often, her tone softer, almost tentative. "Your father's been quiet," she said one night. "He's selling what's left of the firm." I didn't say anything. Some endings don't need commentary. Then one afternoon there was a knock at our apartment door. When I opened it, my father stood there holding a small wooden box. His suit was gone. He wore jeans and an old sweater, the kind he used to wear on weekends, before life turned into numbers and deals. "I wanted you to have this," he said. Inside the box was his old pocket watch, the one he'd never let me touch as a kid. "It was my father's," he said. "He gave it to me when I opened the firm." I traced the engraved initials with my thumb. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you were right," he said. "You built something honest. I tore mine apart." For the first time in my life, I saw tears in his eyes. Not the kind that begged for forgiveness, but the kind that meant he finally understood the cost of his pride. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. "Dad." He looked back, waiting. "You said I made a mistake marrying Ethan." He sighed. "I remember." I smiled faintly. "Turns out he saved this family more than you ever did." He nodded, shoulders heavy, and walked away. That evening, Ethan found me sitting by the window, the pocket watch ticking softly in my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's strange. I spent years wanting him to apologize, and now that he has, it doesn't hurt anymore." Ethan smiled gently. "Maybe that's what healing sounds like." The watch clicked again, steady, rhythmic, alive. I realized it wasn't just a reminder of time lost, but time reclaimed, because for the first time in years, I didn't feel small or invisible. I felt free. A few months later, life felt different. Quieter, lighter. The kind of quiet that doesn't suffocate, it heals. Emily moved into a new apartment near campus. She still called every Sunday, usually laughing about how she was learning to cook something that didn't come from a box. Mom visited once a week, sometimes with cookies, sometimes just to sit and talk. For the first time in years, her eyes didn't look like she was hiding someone else's pain. Dad kept his distance. He sold the firm, paid what he owed, and started working part-time doing small business bookkeeping. "It's humbling," he'd told Emily once. I wasn't sure if that was regret or growth, but maybe it didn't matter. Ethan and I built our own firm, small but honest. We even hired a few interns' kids who reminded me of myself when I was terrified of failing. Sometimes I'd see Dad's old watch ticking on my desk and I'd smile, not out of victory, but peace. The last time I saw him, it was at Emily's graduation. He stood quietly in the crowd, clapping, eyes damp. When he looked at me, he didn't say a word. He just nodded. And in that small, wordless moment, I knew we'd finally made it through. I used to think revenge meant watching someone suffer. But now I know it's watching them learn, watching them face the truth they ran from and finally understand what love was supposed to look like. My father lost everything he built, but somehow we all gained something better: honesty. If this story reminds you of your own family, you're not alone. Sometimes healing starts when we stop trying to prove our worth and just live it. Share this with someone who needs that reminder. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might feel a little too familiar.